hide yourself. There we go. Perfect. I hid myself as well. So
every time I say hide yourself, I think of Parks and Recreation. Treat yourself.
Treat yourself. Retta.
Hide yourself.
Tom Haverford.
Tom Haverford and Retta.
Yeah, what was her name on the show? I'm blanking on that. But
Donna.
Yeah, of course, Donna.
Donna and Tom Haverford.
Yeah.
Treat yourself. Hide yourself.
Chicky parm parm.
It's true though, because if I don't hide myself, then I'm like looking at my own picture the whole time,
like
which is super weird.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's strange. As opposed to looking at you,
right? It's like
which is better.
Beatific vision,
which
is one of the things.
That's what I was thinking.
Which is one of the things that some scholars have thought of in terms of Jacob's ladder, which is Genesis 28. So maybe we'll get there. We'll see. Hello and welcome back to Worst Church Ever. I am Chris.
And I'm Nathan.
And we're two lifelong friends navigating the intersections of the secular and sacred in this space every Monday, and all the days between in the course of our daily lives as husbands, fathers, and followers of Jesus, rejecting fundamentalism and exploring cycles of trauma and healing in the redemptive stories of Scripture and in the reflections of the sacred all around us.
So grab some baked goods and a cup of coffee, because it's time for a discussion at Worst Church Ever. Add your thoughts and comments online, and don't forget to subscribe so we can keep the conversation going.
Nathan, hello. Welcome back,
Hey.
and welcome to our listeners. Welcome back to Worst Church Ever. We are glad to be together. We had a short hiatus because of life and sickness and kids being sick and all other kinds of stuff, but it was a short hiatus, and we are happy to be back now. Second week in a row, back on track. Make sure to check out our YouTube shorts. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can keep the conversations moving forward. Speaking of which, Nathan, what is on your mind today?
I am thinking about the internet, and I'm thinking about social media, specifically because the Supreme Court this week will be hearing testimony from, I think, Texas and Florida about whether or not social media platforms get to delete content or not, which is just an interesting idea of censorship and who has the right to control content. And that is what I'm thinking about today.
Yeah.
And we are on social media.
Right.
And so it does pertain to what we do here.
It
right?
absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I think specifically about sometimes on our social media page, especially on Facebook, there have been plenty of comments that I've deleted because they've been hateful. And I don't care as much if they're hateful toward you or I, but when you start talking about marginalized groups and you start using dog whistles and all other kinds of crazy shit that happens on the page from all quarters, then I start deleting pretty liberally, and I don't have any problem doing that.
So the takeaway here is you can badmouth me and Chris all you want.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't become a personal attack about like our facial hair or our families, like that would probably be over the line. But the content of what we produce, no problem. But once you start marginalizing other human beings or entire groups of people, you're going to get deleted.
You are.
As of right now, you are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Depends on what Clarence Thomas and friends decide, right? Wouldn't that be funny, Nathan? There's Thomas and Friends, Thomas the Tank Engine. Wouldn't that be funny if there was a cartoon, Clarence Thomas and Friends?
I would watch that.
I would watch that too.
That's got to be an SNL skit coming up.
It should be.
If it isn't already, it needs to be. That would be really great.
Yeah, I hereby grant permission in perpetuity for whoever sees this. If you're writing for Do Not Destroy or SNL or whoever, please take that idea and run with it. And all I need is a ticket to the show. I don't care about anything else.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting, and this is, again, just watching this play out, for my entire life, the Conservative Party has been very pro-business, very free market, don't put any sort of regulations on businesses specifically.
Yeah.
But right now, because you have social media platforms that are limiting speech, so to speak, or in their opinion, limiting speech, saying if you post something that has inaccurate information or is lies or is marginalizing other people or counts as hate speech, we're going to remove it from our platforms. As an independent business, they're making this decision. And right now, conservatives are just up in arms because they feel like it is being used as a propaganda machine to just tout liberal woke agendas as opposed to being fair and balanced. I guess what's interesting to me is it's just sort of this reversal where Normally, I would say free enterprise folks would say, no, there's no limits on this. You can do whatever you want. It's your business. If you want to not put certain information on there or not, you get the right to do that because that's just how free enterprise works. And yet, then I run up against the point where I don't like it, and I'm no longer interested in that. And I'd like to have the Supreme Court weigh in and say that you don't have the right to actually limit, even though these are privately owned platforms like Meta and Google. And again, these aren't they're publicly traded,
Right.
sure, but not public entities. They're not government owned.
Exactly. Yeah. And their first commitment, I think any good conservative would say, is to produce results for their shareholders. So if being an engine of online misinformation means their stock price goes down, you would think that they would be applauded for taking steps to correct that. It gets to a key issue of our human experience, which is that we are all incredibly inconsistent, and we are really good at rationalizing and pretending that we don't do special pleading when we do it all the time. On both ends of the political spectrum, no one is consistent at all.
No.
But they have their narratives, and it's embarrassing because if you look at it in a clear-headed way, you can see the inconsistencies. And this is just another example of that. I think I said to you when we were texting about this, you can make a case that the internet in an abstract sense, or even access to the internet, has become a public utility in some way, shape, or form.
Sure,
Fair enough. It's not regulated that way, really, but it functions that way, right? But the idea that a company that owns the code and owns the structure and the platform and everything else, and by the way, owns your information because you gave it to them so that you could like rant about Hillary Clinton or about Donald Trump or whatever. The idea that they can't do what they want with removing information, especially if it's dead wrong and you know that it is, I don't know. It's really shady to me that it's Florida and Texas who are saying, we want to keep misinformation up there when it benefits us. That's what it feels like they're saying. But if there was misinformation up there that was not beneficial for their side or their ideology, I'm sure they would find all mental gymnastic ways to say it doesn't apply there and that shouldn't be allowed, or that's anti-American, or that's whatever. And we hate conservative people hate boycotts until you put a trans activist on a Bud Light can, or until Disney in the 90s said, you know what, maybe gay people should have representation. Everybody's full of shit, Nathan. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, on both sides.
Yeah.
And I think you said it well, on both sides, because I don't think I've ever seen liberals as quick to defend multi-billion-dollar companies as they are right now, with the idea that, no, they should have the right to remove content that's inappropriate and false. And again, who determines what's real and what's not, right? That's right. I don't know. Yeah, I did a little research on this today because it's come up, and it turns out that lies are actually protected under First Amendment free speech.
Of course.
Because, and by the way, so the line of thinking is, Chris and I are going to get it wrong, and things change, right? So even if we didn't get it wrong today, 3 years from now, maybe you look back and you're like, that wasn't really quite right. And is that a lie then? And that just becomes a really hard thing to manage. And then how do you determine what's actually true and what's not? And it's just really hard to regulate that. And so a really famous case came up a few years ago, 2012, where there was a guy that was basically trying to impersonate a military veteran. He wasn't. And he had this kind of stolen valor charges placed against him. And he won in the Supreme Court because lies, even though they are terrible, are protected under free speech. I can say whatever the heck I want.
Yeah.
So I think that's the idea. And so the question then becomes, you can say whatever the heck you want. You can.
Right.
But does it behoove every single person in the planet that they have to then amplify that? So I have the right to say what I want. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. But does that then force another entity to then decide that they also want to say that by keeping that content somewhere else? And that's what I think where you may need to draw the line. And that's where I probably side with the Metas and the Facebooks is, yes, you have a right to say it. Go say it anywhere you want to. Go create your own social network. That's fine. But you can't force Facebook to let you say something if it doesn't abide by their terms and conditions.
That's right.
That's just how it works.
You're completely right. And people also forget, people who want to be constitutional minimalists, most conservatives would consider themselves such. The Constitution guarantees freedom of speech vis-a-vis the government, right? First and foremost,
Right.
The government can't dictate my speech. It can't censor my speech. It can't compel my speech in the United States. The Constitution is not talking about what happens in private companies or on private platforms. And maybe that's an area of really interesting legal discovery and argumentation and theory and all that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Facebook, X, whatever platform you want to talk about, this is not the true public sphere. This is still a business. It's owned by its shareholders, but somebody's in control. Somebody has to be in control. And we know that when corporations lose institutional control, they get heavily punished for that as well. Look at Penn State, which was a public institution, right? They lost institutional control over their football program, and how Jerry Sandusky and others were not held accountable for child abuse. And people were fired and people were fined and people had all kinds of legal repercussions because of that. We can't say that we need to maintain a robust public civic life if we're not also going to say there is some level of accountability in what we do publicly, even when that publicly is essentially private, right? Because Nathan, I can block you on Facebook, or I can limit what you see of mine, and you can do the same. And there are paywalls. And by the way, the whole ecology of how these platforms make money is through advertisements. And advertisers don't want to have to worry about sensitive issues and all this other stuff.
That's exactly right.
So let's make the market free again, right? Florida and Texas. But I think I just go back in my head to this whole idea that saying whatever the hell you want on Facebook is not the same thing as being able to say whatever you want in the actual public square in political discourse. And by the way, you can say terrible things in the public discourse and you will have consequences. And that's not censorship either.
That's the other part of this is you have free speech, but you don't have freedom from consequences.
That's right.
I can say whatever the heck I want on this podcast, but I can't then turn around if I said something disparaging against another individual, and they may have grounds for lawsuits.
That's right. We have libel laws in this country.
Yeah, there's slander, decimation of character, libel. That's the other part of this is if there is something that potentially is incorrect, and I guess the other part of it is you just loosen up the court system and allow more expedited lawsuits to go through, and you may find that there's a financial penalty, even if there's not necessarily a freedom penalty.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I remember 30 years ago when Newt Gingrich came to power and he had the contract with America, one of the big components of that was tort reform, because we were wringing our hands about how our society was so quick to sue over this, that, and the other thing. And I think there's value in examining how litigious we allow ourselves to be, right? But Republicans, conservatives are not typically the ones who you would think of as being really in favor of all kinds of civil lawsuits. In fact, in most cases, if you're arguing in favor of limited government, right, I can't imagine, having all kinds of lawsuits about this person said that or this person said this and whatever.
You wouldn't think so, and yet our former president had quite a few. And continues to. And by the way, to be fair, on both sides, it's not just lawsuits that have been filed against him. He has filed plenty on the other side.
Oh my gosh. And something I said to you in our prep for this show was Republicans, sometimes it might appear that, especially me, I'm only disparaging Republicans. I'm not. I think I said to Nathan via text earlier today, Republicans, one of the things that frustrates me so much about them is they make it really hard to vote against Democrats. Because Democrats can be smug as hell, right? But everybody is it's this race to the bottom. And I was talking with my 16-year-old son about this the other day, and he said to me, George Washington predicted it. And I was like, you're paying attention. Good job. I appreciate that.
It's true.
Because all we care about is the win. And we justify that by saying, well, if we don't win, bad things happen. But guess what happens when all you care about is the win? You get so-called liberal politicians that couldn't beat Donald Trump. Why? Because when he gets on the debate stage with Hillary Clinton and says, oh yeah, the tax code is fixed, it's rigged, and she's not going to change it because she benefits from it. I forget which comedian said this. Oh, I think it was Dave Chappelle. He said, that's when Trump won, was when he said, she won't fix them because they benefit her. And let's be honest, in the American political system, most liberals, most boomer liberals, most establishment liberals are not very far away from most conservatives when it comes to being in love with big business. They're really not. They'll push harder on certain reforms and areas. They'll push for minimum wage reform. They might push for more equity in the workplace. But by and large, they refuse to ask the big questions. And they refuse to make these corporations pay more in tax. I'm talking about your mainstream political candidates that do all the winning, right? I'm not talking about your Bernies and people like that. But we have this narrow, here's the spectrum. And I don't know if I'm still in frame, but here's the spectrum. And we think that like Biden is here and Trump is here. And in some ways, maybe that's true. But so often it's really more like if the center is, here's Biden and here's most Republicans, maybe not Trump. He's a weird outlier, right? But
I don't know that he's further left or right. He's an other.
He's just another. Yeah, he does whatever is advantageous for him. But show me and explain to me a real difference between 1996 Bob Dole and 2016 Hillary Clinton. There's not much. A couple issues.
No. I have a friend who typically says for most Americans, it doesn't really matter who the president is.
Yeah.
It really doesn't affect us one way or the other. Because, and here's the reason, because for government to succeed or to exist, you need to have at least a fairly decent-sized tax-paying population that's going to fund it all. And you can't just uproot the entire thing and throw it away, or else you just can't fund it.
Yeah.
We can't really make these massive sweeping changes that are going to affect too many people, or else it just doesn't work. So you might prefer to have somebody with one color tie versus the other in office, but the reality is, at the end of the day, like on a large scale, most of those things economically don't necessarily change all that much. On other fronts, certainly they do.
Yeah.
And I don't want to downplay the fact that there are certain things that are probably more important to other people as economics. The other thing of this, and I hate to quote Ron Paul because he's got this weird thing, but he said something really great that I've really latched onto. He's like, what do you think? The president doesn't control the economy anyway. It's not like it's like when you're in high school and the class president's like, I promise we'll get a vending machine on every single floor. And you're like, you can't even do that. That's not like part of your job description. You can move the military around, you can veto bills from Congress, but run the economy is not actually in the Constitution.
That's
there's
right.
things you can do to economically influence things, but ultimately you can't just be like, well, President Trump's going to end inflation. It's not like you just decide one day that we're going to stop inflation. That's not how it works.
There's precious little in the Constitution about monetary policy or economic policy, right? And it's one of the areas where so-called conservatives do act like FDR New Dealers. They might not like entitlements, they might not like the programs, but they really like the idea that the president, whoever it may be, can really affect job creation, can really affect consumer confidence, can really affect the actual dollars and cents of the economy. Now, when you talk about tax policy and how that affects real Americans, absolutely, right?
Sure.
We can talk about reforming payroll tax. We can talk about corporate tax loopholes and all those different things. That's different. That would really affect people in their pocketbook if the powers that be in both major parties weren't so beholden to interests that don't want those things to change. So, yeah.
Correct.
That's how I would look at it.
And this is why this debate is going on, because you've got so many different opinions. There is a danger in just carte blanche limiting opinions everywhere. But again, I don't control Facebook and I don't control YouTube and Instagram. And so I don't know that I have the authority to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
From just a private enterprise perspective. You don't like it, there's a different social media platform out there that you can just join that doesn't do that. Reddit is out there, 4chan and all these other places. They're just like Discord. It's like the Wild West. You can say whatever you want. Certain ones. There's other ones that have monitors and forum moderators that actually will shut down some comment threads or eliminate them. But some of them, they just say whatever you want.
And it's so funny that we're like clenching our pearls over, people might get censored on Facebook. It's if somebody wrote on my fence, I hate Chris, I'm going to wipe that off. You know what I mean?
Correct.
Again, it goes back to this idea of what's actually public and what's actually protected, and philosophically what should be protected, because people who are in favor of these laws, people who are on the Texas and Florida side of this, are putting themselves in a position to say, we elevate Facebook and X and all these other platforms to the rarefied realm of constitutionally protected public square discourse. And I'm not sure that it deserves that kind of credit. Most of it's garbage.
Interestingly enough, Rick DeSantis, who is probably one of the proponents of overturning this, also is very protective of what content are in public libraries and what content are taught in public schools and what content is taught in the narrative of what is in the public square. And again, I don't really have I don't live in Florida, so what they do doesn't really apply to me here in Maine. But at the same time, it's that same idea is like, when I want to remove content, I'm going to use every single thing in my power to get rid of it. However, if I want to say something and someone else doesn't like it and they remove it, then I'm going to fight to overturn it.
Yep.
And I think it gets to that idea of just because I have something to say does not give me the right to have somebody to hear it. And I think that's part of it, right? I can go to the public square I can go to the free speech square at the local university and I can say whatever I want to say, but I can't force the entire school to show up and listen.
Yep. Right.
I'd like it if our podcast was on every single feed in the entire world and we had 10 billion subscribers. Yeah, that would be great, but that's not how the world works. You don't just automatically have a right to everyone's ears.
Do you think, I'm going to say something provocative here, I think.
Sure.
Do you think...
Are you going to provoke me or are you going to provoke our audience? I guess that's before I agree.
No, it won't provoke you. Do you think this is really about which side thinks they're winning at manipulating and fooling baby boomers?
Probably. That's who's on Facebook right now is baby boomers. Most of the Gen X and millennials are off. Right. They're not there. Gen X, I guess, is like kind of beholden to that because I say we. I didn't invent Facebook, but I think Facebook was invented by Gen Xers, right?
Sure. Yeah, and that's how a lot of us first reconnected, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it skews older at this point.
Sure.
In time. I think it was originally like going to be this social media platform that a lot of high school and college kids used, and now we all grew up.
Yeah.
And now we have babies.
Yeah.
And then our parents got on, and then that kind of ruined the show. Because when you see your parents sharing pictures, it stops getting as interesting.
The manufactured rage that I see coming from boomers because they read something on Facebook and they think it's true, and then they go insane with it. And I think the right understands that they are better at manipulating people on social media than the left is, and I think that's why these lawsuits are happening. And don't get me wrong, both sides try to do it. The right, I think, is better at it.
No doubt, there is a propaganda machine happening, and I think it's huge. The other part of it is, and I saw a couple of documentaries on this. One in particular was on Netflix, and it was really insightful, and it was really important. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It was talking about how misinformation is actually more interesting and actually gets people sucked in more than real information. And it was just talking about how a lot of times these narratives, you've seen some folks that when 2008, 2009, 2012, when they started on Facebook, was just more of a social network. But as we got better at generating content, it became these rabbit holes that they got sucked into, and conspiracy theories, and on the left and the right. That's not just on the right. And you have people that come out with these ideas, and it's just, to your point, I saw it on the internet. It must be true. Chris in the dark web corners, like, he had these really good ideas, and I can tell that it's being suppressed because he only had 6 views on it. And that's telling me that Facebook is doing this thing. No, Facebook got you to it.
Yeah, that's right. You're not shadow banned. No one cares about what you're talking about.
Yeah,
for sure. And also, by the way, you have to do some due diligence. So I find Theo Von to be hysterical. Okay. And he's one of those guys that maybe not everybody loves, and that he's in the ecosystem of Shane Gillis, who was just on SNL and did an interesting job on SNL and Berkshire.
I saw a quote, Chris. It said that Shane Gillis did the show we expected him to do.
Yes, and the show that he expected to do. When part of your monologue is, I shouldn't be here, don't Google why I got fired from here, and none of my jokes are really appropriate for TV. And he's probably, of those kinds of comedians, he's definitely, I would say, the most moderate and everything else. But all that is to say that sometimes when you're in these rabbit holes, you start getting stuff that's really out there, but if you don't contextualize it, you're like, yeah, that makes complete sense. So there's this guy, Eric Weinstein, okay? I don't know him from Adam, but he popped up in a short. I'm like, this guy's saying really interesting stuff about the president of Harvard who was just dismissed. And so let me look into him more. I'm like, oh yeah, this guy also has a theory of everything, and he's taking down string theory. This guy's brilliant. If you only look at that, what's served up to you because you think Theo Von's funny, you're going to fall down that rabbit hole. You have to then Google Eric Weinstein and be like, he doesn't have a lot of credibility among physicists and other things. And I'm not trying to disparage him or build him up. He was an example of a guy who I was like, on the surface, this guy sounds brilliant. But then you start digging and you're like, yeah, maybe this guy's crazy. You just don't know. And you have to do that due diligence. You can't just let the algorithm dictate who you become, you know?
By the way, I'm going to say something actually provocative to Chris right now. Chris is the guy that does believe in UFO theories. So, like, there is a little bit of that, too, that we just got to, like, throw that out there.
That's true. It's in my feed, yeah.
That's right. Chris is loves the UFO rabbit holes.
Yes,
so if there is something that's, like, out there as it can possibly get, he will probably love it, even if it's just going to feed the hobby.
So my short feed on YouTube is some like a lot of Theo Von, and then there's the Joe Rogan adjacent stuff. And then the other thing that's on there is I always get Snoop Dogg and 50 Cent talking smack on everybody else, and it is hilarious. And I don't think I've ever even purchased a rap album, Nathan, but their personalities are so large and intriguing, and I just love to watch them talk about 90s hip hop and coming out of their communities and all this other stuff. That's who's in my feed right now. So
my feed is mostly soccer/futsal tricks and drills.
Nice.
And Rick Beato, who's the like just probably the most world famous music interviewer at this point in time. And Jacob Collier has now started to make an appearance quite a bit.
I don't know if I know
Jacob
who that
Collier.
is.
Jacob Collier is just a phenomenally talented musician / arranger. He's a younger guy. He's actually won a number of Grammys, and he was accompanying Joni Mitchell on piano at the Grammys this year.
Got it.
He's a very colorful character. If you like see it, he's always wearing like Crocs and these brightly colored stuff, and his hair goes all over the place. But this kid, I say kid, he's like close to 30 now, I think.
Yeah.
But he has this tremendous baritone voice and has like a 24 octave range on it. That's not true. You can't actually sing 24 octaves, but
I get what you mean.
Like
4 octaves.
His octave range.
Yeah.
And he'll do a lot of a cappella arrangements where he's playing like all of the parts himself, and he'll have just the recordings of himself doing these, and then he'll go into places and find other people and have them do it. And the kid can play like every single instrument.
Wow.
Every single one. Better than I can play the one instrument, the guitars that I have back here. He can play guitar as a multi-instrumentalist better than I can play guitar as a solo instrumentalist. But then piano and all this other stuff. I actually saw a little interview with him, and actually it wasn't with him, it was with the composer Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer. An interview with Hans Zimmer, who was talking about how he heard of Jacob Collier, but he didn't really know who he was yet. And then he let him use his studio, and he's like, what in the world's going on? Like, all these people that I want to, like Herbie Hancock and like all these other people that I like want to play with are like coming in, and there's this 19-year-old kid that's like messing with a coffee maker. Who is this? Oh, that's Jacob Collier. He's like, how did he get all these people here? Like, how is this kid like the center of music? I don't understand. Anyway, he's just this phenomenally gifted musician, multi-instrumentalist, and just this really nice guy. Like, he's just so kind and so nice, and you see him, he always has this big grin on his face, and he just seems like he exuberates joy.
Nice.
So check him out.
A guy that you won good things for. So that sounds, I will. I'll check him out. That sounds like up my alley for sure.
He's a musician's musician.
I love
I'll
that.
put it that way.
Very good.
Musician's musician. Hopefully he'll break out into the rest of the world. And he is, because he's got multiple Grammys, and I think his following is just skyrocketed. So that's my feed, is a lot of Jacob Collier, Rick Beato, futsal, and of course, Worst Church Ever.
Of course. It's a good mix.
That's a good mix. It's a good mix. You want to talk a little bit about Jacob today? And I think he's going to go off solo for a little bit, because he's got sent off in the last chapter. We talked a little bit last time about Esau and how Esau really had a pretty big letdown, finding out that his brother not only got the blessing, but then got set off to marry somebody outside of the family. Actually, not outside of the family, but part of Rebecca's family. And he had this moment where he decided that he needed to maybe go marry somebody in the family. Maybe that would make it better for him.
Yeah.
And Chris, you brought up this really great point that Jesus is saying you need to leave this stuff behind, right? And Esau, to his detriment, really can't let go of that need for his parents' approval.
Yeah.
Where Jacob, again, he has his brother about ready to murder him, so that helps. But he heads out of town and is willing to leave it all behind. And you don't get to turn the chapter unless sometimes you leave it all behind.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the next part of chapter 28 in Genesis finds Jacob then departing and going on this journey where he's going to go to the household of his mother's brother Laban. And eventually that's where he will meet not one, but two wives from the house of Laban. And we'll see the trickster motif turned around on Jacob. Laban tricks him contractually into 14 years of indentured servitude, and in exchange for the hand of each of these wives. And there's definitely deceit and all kinds of stuff going on there, which is interesting because Jacob is the one who, with help from mom, deceived dad, maybe, certainly deceived brother Esau, and now he's being deceived. So there's some comeuppance and some cycles of trickery here that are happening.
Trickster gets tricked.
The trickster gets tricked, yeah, which is an interesting kind of motif because a lot of the wisdom literature in Scripture, but also in other ancient traditions and other cultures' scriptures, do make it plain that what goes around comes around, what comes around goes around, whatever that saying is. There's a karmic echo to a lot of practical things that we do to each other.
Yeah.
Even if there's no sort of mystical karmic action going on, sometimes it's just the physics of retaliation or whatever.
Absolutely.
So we do have that happening. But interestingly, the very next thing from where we picking up from where we just left off is Jacob on this journey. He gets tired, and out in the open country, he goes to sleep at night. A rock becomes his pillow. And then he has this dream, and the dream has become known as Jacob's ladder. But basically, the idea is Jacob has this dream of either a ladder or maybe a staircase or some sort of structure that bridges the gap between where he is in the desert on earth and the reaches of heaven. And there are angels ascending and descending, and they're coming down to Jacob, they're going back up, and Yahweh appears to Jacob at the top of this ladder and reaffirms the covenant promises that he made to Abraham and to Isaac. And then Jacob has this experience of God, wakes up, and basically prays to God and says, if you do for me the things that you just told me you're going to do, and if you provide me with bread and with shelter and with good fortune, then you will be my God. And I'm thinking to myself when I'm reading this, well, this is the God who identifies himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac. This is the God that your dad has just blessed you with the birthright pertaining to. This is the God of your grandfather. The balls on this guy to be like, okay, if you do what you say, then you'll be my God. This God has already delivered your family repeatedly out of bad situations and blessed them with great wealth. And yet you're playing that role of, okay, yeah, we'll see. We'll make a transaction here. Nathan, that's the part of the story that I find particularly fascinating and sort of out of nowhere. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have so many. The first is Jacob is a trickster. Why would you expect other people to uphold their end of a bargain? And also, I think there's a callback to Esau and the stew. He's looking there and he's thinking that he can probably negotiate this to his betterment. So he's looking at Esau and he's like, hey, now you're hungry. You're in a vulnerable position. I got the stew and maybe we could do a little deal here, right? And it's not a very good deal for Esau. And I just think this is a guy that's trying to master the art of the deal, so to speak. And he's, hey, look, you know what? I'm just going to put the terms of the contract out there. If you do all these things, then I will consider it.
That's a really good insight, Nathan. That's a really good insight. And it starts to make me think of, and this coming from my own background, my own life, we talked a little bit about last time about how Esau is forgotten and overlooked time and again. We likened that to how our generation, Gen X, is typically glossed over, forgotten, skipped over. And so when I put up the last episode today, the thumbnail talks about Esau being the patron saint of Gen X.
I love that, by the way.
I knew you would.
Patron saint. I was just, you always come up with better titles than I do.
Well, you put the seed there and then it's collaborative. But now, as I'm hearing you say this about Jacob, it makes me think of how so often young Gen Xers, because we're on the young side, we're not young for a lot of things anymore, but we're young for Gen X. Young Gen Xers often have siblings who are older millennials, right? And I would say that your brother's probably a millennial, right? My sister certainly is. And I am now thinking about Esau as the poor Gen Xer who keeps getting forgotten and passed over, and Jacob as the entitled effing millennial who is spoiled and gets whatever he wants and has no idea that life is not just transactional and that life is not just about getting what you want. And his audacity extends all the way up this stairway to heaven, all the way up to Yahweh himself.
Yeah. I saw Simon Sinek, who is a well-known public speaker.
Yeah.
He's another one that actually pops up on my feed quite a bit. But he was talking about Gen X versus millennials and Gen Y. Actually, I think he was talking about Gen Y. But he was saying that we love Gen Y when they confront climate change. But we hate it when they go and skip over everybody, just walk right into the president's office of the company and just strike up a conversation like they're best friends. That's what Jacob's doing.
Yes.
He doesn't see the social hierarchy that other people do. He just assumes that he can just walk up the ramp and just talk to Yahweh and make a deal.
So I love that you said that. And I think there's probably a healthy application of that attitude, right? We don't have to view it as audacious in a bad way. I'm thinking about William Penn, right? The famous colonial who founded Pennsylvania, and he was a Quaker. And in his day and age, one of the things the Quakers were scandalous for was refusing to address social superiors by their titles. There was no sir or ma'am above any Quaker because all were equal in the light of God. And so they were famous for flaunting. They wouldn't participate in the system of deference, right?
Yeah.
And I remember one time when you become a pastor, you have to do all these different background checks, of course, but also there's psychological evaluations you have to have. And I went for one in this journey to get my certifications. And I remember being introduced to the people who were going to be evaluating me. And we're all adults, okay? I was probably 35. They were older. And so it was Dr. So-and-so, and he introduced himself as Dr. So-and-so. Okay, fine. And then his assistant did not have an advanced degree, but had probably been in this field for a long time. And she introduced herself as Mrs. So-and-so. And I'm thinking to myself, I am a grown-ass man. You're not Mrs. anybody. You're Patty or Linda or Karen or whoever you are. And honestly, that reaction was stronger in me with her than it was with him because we're so conditioned to have deference to doctors. But I would like to think that even if Mrs. So-and-so had been a Mr. So-and-so, I would have been just as annoyed. And so anyway, there is a healthy way to apply this audacity, and there's a liberation in it when it's being used, I think, in healthy ways. Jacob just seems to be a jerk, but I still think we can learn good things from it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably that picture that we're having because of his history, right? He has tricked people, and he has been transactional with Esau, and he's been manipulative and with his mom, and so now we're seeing it through the lens of that. Whereas if it had been another character, let's say this was Joseph. This is fast forwarding later on in the book of Genesis, but Joseph, who has this, even though he has his own thing, that he also has a little bit of an ego in the beginning of the book. He also has just this kindness and this goodness, and he's presented in this almost saint-like quality that he can do no wrong. If he had access, we probably wouldn't be even having this conversation. We'd just be like, yeah, of course you do.
Yeah.
Of course you do, because you are the kind of person that we imagine would have it.
Right. But we are ticked off at Jacob here because you're right, because of his history. And, as Christians, you and I are people who believe that we have direct access to God. There need not be a formal deference of this literal or figurative ladder or stairway to heaven, or the mediation of the priest or the cult of the temple, or all these different things, right? We have to remember too that in this part of the narrative, God, Yahweh, is still in the process of revealing his character to this family. Yeah, I don't think we have really a full revelation of it in a lot of ways, and it's a generational process, which I think is interesting, because you find God, the ineffable, eternal, ultimate, maybe having to learn on the job how to really interact with people who die and people who only live for 70 or 80 years if they're lucky. So I don't know.
That's
Might
right.
be something to that too.
Yeah, I think the other part of it is, and this is encouraging to me, is that when you look at the narrative of Genesis, the people that are picked, some of them are like Joseph, where they're good and they're kind and they look out for people and they cry a lot, by the way. I can't wait till we get to Joseph. He's probably one of my favorite characters in the Bible. Cries a lot. That guy cries a lot.
He's a crier.
I do too.
He's a crier.
He's a crier.
I'm not a
He's
crier.
a crier. I'm a crier.
Crying Joseph, that's what we call him.
Baby,
Baby wow wow.
baby Joseph. Baby wow wow. Wow wow. Baby wow wow. But so we got people like Joseph who are clearly the ones that you would picture as the ones that have access to God. And then you have people like Jacob who you would picture as the villains also having access to God.
Yeah.
And that I think is profound because you don't have a lot of literature from this era or sacred stories from this era or even morality tales or ethical treatments from this era that give you this universal access to anything.
Yeah.
It's a very much like you have to follow these very clear set of rules and sacrifices, and then maybe the gods will turn and they will hear and they will give you reprieve. In this, it's saying, no, it's not that it's random, but it's that anyone can qualify for this.
Yeah.
The scoundrels and the saints alike have access to the goodness of God.
Yeah. That sounds like a Rich Mullins lyric, is it? Because I love that.
I don't, it probably is inspired by.
Yeah.
It's probably inspired by.
The scoundrels and the saints alike. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think you're 100% right. And I'm so glad you said it that way because it reminds me too of in the living memory of this family are the interactions that they've had with these other pantheons, the household idols. We look at the different gods of, say, ancient Greece or Rome or Phoenicia or wherever. And every time it's exactly what you say, Nathan, they're capricious and they have to be mollified. And it is transactional in all of these other pantheons. And the God who's revealing God's self to this family in these stories is unique among these gods because this God seems to be interested in acting in ways that are moral, and it seems not to be capricious, seems not to want to advance his own emotional or even physical fulfillment at the expense of others. We have stories of Zeus raping mortal women, right? You don't see anything like that in the stories of Yahweh. The other things that make you scratch your head, but what's being built here seems to be a progressive revelation of the idea that an ethic of life is tied into the character of this God who this family will eventually come to believe is the only God that is, or the only God that is real.
Yeah, no doubt. He calls himself by many different names in this particular book and in subsequent narratives. And last time we called this particular entity El Shaddai.
Right.
And this time, who are we hearing from this time? Is it El Shaddai?
You know what? I want
to see.
Yeah, let's pull it up because I don't recall off the top
I'm
of my
going to take
head.
a look right here.
Take a look.
Lord, it doesn't specifically say. I'm looking in Alter's translation again, who sometimes gives you a little bit more. I think he just says Lord here.
Is it Lord with all capital letters or is it?
It is Lord with all capital letters. So
usually,
that may be your hint.
Yeah, so that's Yahweh. If Lord is rendered in all capitals, that's Yahweh. If it's rendered just as a regular word, that's Adonai, usually, in the Hebrew scriptures.
Yep.
So this is Yahweh. And then that opens up a whole other narrative and interpretive question of when is it that this family or that the Jewish people or the nation of Israel first get the revelation of the name Yahweh, because there's a strong tradition that it doesn't happen until Exodus with Moses, but then you see it in these other strains of the narrative. And the question, is this how he revealed himself, or is this a person writing this story down well after the oral traditions have been set, who now has this revealed name Yahweh? And there are some scholars who say, oh, when you see El Shaddai or when you see these other names, that's really referring to some other Canaanite god. And I'm thinking to myself, it maybe, but it need not. These are epithets. These are attributes of God, right? God Most High, God the Lord, God the Faithful, God my Provider, right? All these different things. You can read it in any way you
Pastor,
want,
Pastor Chris versus Daddy.
Right, exactly.
Versus the name that your mom calls you when you're in trouble. Those are still all you.
That's true.
And yet they're different names, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure people call you Pastor.
Right.
They don't even call you Pastor Chris. They're like, hey, Pastor.
Some people do. Some, especially older people. Yep. Or
Right?
they'll use pastor as like a pronoun, like, oh, pastor said, you know what I mean? And it's charming. I don't mind it, but but you're right. Yes, absolutely.
I work in corporate America. I'm a trainer, but nobody calls me like Trainer Nate.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's a good point.
It's your honorific, really. It's your doctor.
Yeah.
It's your doctor.
That's true.
I refuse to use it. I'll become a Quaker.
There you go. But yeah, no, I'm good with it.
I think there's other people that say this might have been a plurality of gods that were boiling down into one. And I think that there's a lot of people that say it is the same one, that they're realizing different attributes for us. So they have different names, and then they realize maybe that it's the same one, so to speak. So I think there's a lot to that, and maybe we can talk about that in another session. But really good conversation here about this whole thing, because I do think that the crux of this particular story really is that access piece, and whether he's a crook or whether he is a saint. At this point in time, I wouldn't call him one. He's got that access, and he's clearly had a dream placed out for him. I think that's really cool, because you've got God revealing himself in lots of different ways. In this case, it's in the middle of a dream on a rock.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's able to meet the trickster that wants to make a deal where he is and speak to him in the language that he needs to hear. And okay, you got to make the deal out of it, then we'll make it a deal.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that God in this dream is not requiring the trickster to ascend the ladder to meet God. God is meeting the trickster when the trickster's still at the very bottom of the rung. So I think there's definitely something with that too, I think.
Yeah, maybe that is the other part of it, is like, maybe in this moment, this is the first time he actually truly gets a vision of where he actually is on the ladder, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? And realizes, oh, I'm lower down. I'm lower down than I thought. So, maybe we had thought about it as this, like, the gumption of this guy that he can get to the top of the ladder. And maybe it's the opposite, where he's, tell you what, I'm going to try to climb that thing if you'll let me.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
And he realizes where he is, and I'm not even going to bother trying unless I have some sort of sign from you that it's okay.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what it is I really would like to be up there. I need to have that invitation just invoked, because maybe I just don't even feel worthy of it.
Ooh, I like
and
that.
Maybe that may be another part of that.
I like that a lot.
I'm willing to climb, but I need to feel like you want me up there.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's very good.
And that probably makes sense too, because I think if I think about it I don't just walk into the president's office. I would probably wait for an invitation to come in there.
Yeah.
And saying that, if she said, hey, my door's open anytime, I might say, hey, send me a meeting maker and I will definitely come over.
Yeah.
And I will probably not wait for the meeting maker. I'm assuming it won't come.
Yep.
But if it does, sure, I'll show up in the office.
Well said.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. See, and I think this teaches me and us, like, we were talking before we recorded about how this story is weird and maybe it doesn't even matter. But I think when we come across things in scripture that are on the surface very inscrutable, we would do well to kind of hang with them and then let them inform the way we journey in the story in the chapters that are to come, right? Like, it's there for a reason.
Would he be as willing to go through the next 14 years without this dream? I don't know. Maybe he would.
Yeah. Ooh, that's good. That's good.
And maybe that's why he hangs on for 14 years, is because of that promise. That's thinking that guy.
Yeah, that's really good.
There's some other brothers that, Chris, you and I love to talk about.
Yes, we do. Go ahead, Nathan. You set it up for us.
Well, as you know, we love Oasis around here. All things Oasis. Chris is the Liam fan. I am the Noel fan.
I mean, we're both fans of both, but if we had to take sides,
it's contentious around here.
Yeah.
It's contentious. But there is a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame possibility here, and one brother would really like it, and the other brother wants to have nothing to do with it. Want to take a guess which is which? In the comments, before you actually hear from us, who do you think wants to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and who do you think doesn't? And spoiler alert, it's not who you think. What do you think? So Liam is the one that does not want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
What do you think that is? Because it just seems like he would probably want to have everything to do with that.
You would think, but I don't know, man. I'm going to try to pull up the quote. Hold on a second. Sorry.
Oh, good. You're pulling up quotes. This is great.
Yeah. I think he loves to be contrarian and everything. And
by the way, if we're going to pull up a quote, spoiler alert, we're going to get an explicit rating on YouTube for this one.
Yeah, good point. Okay. He says, he tweets, finding out that they're now nominated this year. He says, he uses the whole word, but I'll say the whatever.
The edited one.
Yeah. F the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's full of bumbaclarts. I have no idea what a bumbaclart is. I had to look it up, and I still don't know what it is. And then he says, and he don't need some wank award by some geriatric in a cowboy hat. End quote. And then he says, hold on a second, there's more. He says, and as much as I love Mariah Carey and all that, I want to say, do me a favor and F off.
Sure that Noel has to pick the opposite opinion, because that's just how the two brothers are. But I imagine that Noel's would be full of just as much expletives, but in this case, and I haven't seen it, so I'm making this up, but I just imagine that Noel's would have been like, it's about time, with a string of expletives, right? And I'm sure that's not what he actually said, but that is interesting. Actually, now to think about it, though, that really does align with Liam, who basically looks at what his brother's doing right now, and he's calling it like elevated elevator music.
Yes.
He's like, it's not even rock and roll anymore. It's like soft rock.
Yeah.
I want nothing to do with it.
I remember when the one album came out of Noel's that had that song Riverman, and there was a saxophone at the end. And Pink Floyd has saxophone and stuff. But I remember Liam was like, okay, this one track has a saxophone. He's like, Liam's like, that's a bit pervy, isn't it? So now whenever I hear a sax, now I think of Liam saying saxophones are pervy. And I'm like, I kind of know what he means. Like a careless whisper. a little late night Cinemax. Anyway.
Yeah, those brothers can really go after it. I remember, I don't know if we talked about this before, but in the pandemic, apparently Liam gained a little weight.
Yeah.
And he had been complaining about not being able to get out and not being able to access anything. And I think Nola tweeted, the one thing he's still got access to is the trolley suites or something like that. The sweet trolley certainly has been making its rounds or whatever. I don't know, but those brothers, I think those two, very much a Jacob and Esau, like the contentiousness between the two of them. I think they're going to get back together, though.
They have to. Yeah.
Will it last? No.
It can be just one tour. And in true Oasis fashion, it'll probably cancel it halfway through.
Yeah, just go to Bonnaroo or something. Like, just do like a couple of festivals.
Do a couple big shows. Go to Coachella. Go to Rock in Rio.
Yeah.
But if Axl and Slash and Duff can get on the same page, you guys should be able to get on the same page.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to whether or not they're able to make enough money with their side gigs to do what they want. And that's really what it comes down to. If they're able to support their lifestyles on their solo tours, they probably won't.
Well,
but if they feel like they need an extra influx of $1 billion, then they'll go on a world tour.
Liam has a new record coming out with John Squire from what was he from? Stone Roses. They've got a new record coming out. So he's doing that. And so we'll see.
Yeah. I think that the tour that he's going on with, Liam's touring on, what's it called? Be Here Now, right?
No, Definitely Maybe.
Definitely Maybe.
30th anniversary, right.
Yeah. So, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe they'll have a tour.
What I want to see happen is, like, the opening show at the Manchester Center, wherever, surprisingly, Noel just walks out on stage and they tear it down. You know what I mean? That's what I want to see happen. So
that happened to Gilmore and Waters. Gilmore came out and played a couple of shows with Roger Waters during the Wall tour a couple of years ago. I think it was like 2006 or something like that. And Gilmore came out and played a couple solos with him. Comfortably Numb, of course.
Of course. Have you seen, I'm sure you have, Gilmore, is it live at the Acropolis? How do you say that? Acropolis.
Yeah.
The Acropolis.
Yes.
With the lasers, and it's so atmospheric. It's so good.
Yeah. That's another. Well, they can't get back together now because they've too many of those members have now passed on. But those guys may not ever see eye to eye again, especially because of the divisiveness of current politics in the Middle East. I don't think the two of them are ever going to see eye to eye on that. But they certainly made some good music together.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Certainly made some good music.
If you have to replace Sid Barrett, my goodness, how many times do you find a David Gilmour? You know what I mean?
I mean, he's my favorite guitar player of all time. Personally, I don't think that's kind of like, you remember in High Fidelity when Jack Black's character, when he's like criticizing all the things that John Cusack has on his top 5 list, he's like, really? Why don't you just put Nirvana Nevermind as your number 1 record?
I do remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
Or whatever
Yep.
he says. Yeah. Saying that David Gilmour is your favorite guitarist. Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Like you and the entire world.
Yeah. It's for a reason, man.
So before we go, I have to say on the David Gilmour thing, this will be a good generational thing to end with. There is a phrase in the guitar community that the newest guitar players that are starting to come up on YouTube and social media use, and they call it boomer bends. When the David Gilmour, when they bend the strings up like that, they're like, oh, it's boomer bends. They just can't. They're like, so stupid. Like, why do they do that?
Because it
I'm
sounds
like, because
awesome.
it's awesome.
That's right.
But you see a lot of them, they're like technical players, and they're like playing with both hands on the strings.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Like a lot of them aren't using picks anymore, and they're just crazy good. But yeah, they don't want to use boomer bends.
That's really
No
funny.
boomer bends.
That's really funny.
Leave that for David Gilmour.
It's pervy.
It's pervy. It's pervy. Too pervy.
This was a good episode, Nathan.
Yeah, man. Thanks. I really appreciate it spending an hour with you. It's been great.
Likewise. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
See you soon.